So if you guys, just a little, it kind of bothers me and makes me twitch a little bit because it's a chiropractic clinic and the news focused on that spinning thing, which they use maybe 5–10% of the time. And then when they go to an adjustment, which granted, if you guys have ever seen some of the YouTube chiropractic commercials, they're really weird. And it doesn't do a lot for our PR because you see people getting a cervical, a supine cervical, and you see people kind of, whatever. But at least, I don't know. In my opinion, they should have showed more, but that wasn't up to them. That was actually the news crew. So some of the biggest questions I get being involved with this stuff is, I heard you guys don't adjust a lot. I heard you guys aren't philosophical. And I want to go through that, and I want to talk about that because I think it's the farthest from the truth. I think, if you say you're a functional neurologist, I think there's some of the most philosophically sound people there are. It's just our version of philosophy, right? I really like this quote, and it's going to set off what we're going to talk about today. It is impossible to separate the health of your body or mind from the health of your brain. And health care that ignores the brain will always be incomplete care. It's going to work. Where's Matt Talley at? Right here. Hey, what's up, Matt? So Matt just made us a website, and it's awesome. If you guys haven't seen it, if you guys have your laptops, just pull up your laptop and go to parkerneurologyclub.com. It's got an About Us section. It's got, more information about what functional neurology is. I think he's busy doing our tech thing right now. But thanks. Can y'all hear me okay? I talk loud anyway, but no, I don't have to scream. Thank you. We've also got a Facebook. A lot of our, if we ever advertise throughout this try that, okay, we've changed times, we've changed rooms, whatever, we normally do it on Facebook. And we try to get the word out through announcements, and we try to get the word out through, other ways. But if you guys are on our Facebook, it makes it really easy because you just get notified. Okay, so find our Facebook. If you guys are into Twitter, we try to, not really make our own stuff. I'll get on there and I'll just think something's cool and I'll just repost it. So if you got, I think it's interesting, maybe one person out of somebody in here might find it interesting and might help you out. So. Alright, so most of us, I think, are tries 1 through 3 in here, and we're in some sort of philosophy class. So right now we're kind of in a philosophy class, and to me it's more of a history of chiropractic philosophy. With philosophy, you kind of have to deal with philosophy and science at the same time. So philosophy, you got to figure out what you're asking. Philosophy is what's appropriate, what's the kind of question I should be asking? Does it make sense to ask this question or does it not? And then science steps in, and science is okay, well, let's figure out some of this stuff. Let's be specific. Let's measure it. Let's find a way to measure it, and then let's measure it. And then it loops back around now that you figured out something in science, and you say, okay, cool. Now that we know this about, this scientific model, let's go back to philosophy and let's ask another question. And then it goes loops, 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 loops. So if I can get any point made today, it's you're not a philosophical, as a chiropractor, as a practitioner, it's really hard to be just philosophical or just scientific. You can't do, they do work together, and they do, the more philosophically sound you are and the more scientific you can incorporate that into your philosophy, it's going to help you be focused. It's going to make you have a mission statement. It's going to make you have a vision statement. It's going to help you be way more successful with the patient. So D.D. Palmer said, there are 2 classes of chiropractors, those who desire to know all they can of physiology, pathology, neurology, and anatomy, and those who have an aversion for intelligence. Do not want to take into consideration depending only upon examination of the spinous process. We're going to talk a lot about that today too, and where we stand on that. Okay, in order to do what we want to do today, I kind of need everybody on a basic ground level. What up, Paul? Hey, Paul, come join me, man. If y'all want to know Paul, does everybody know Paul? Yeah, everybody knows Paul.
Thank Paul.
Yeah. So Paul's going to help us with all the smart stuff. If I get confused, if I get tripped up, Paul's going to help me out. Cool? And Paul's been awesome. He's been an instructor for Neuro Club for a long time. So, like I said, he knows his stuff. So let's talk about some of these real quick because this is going to help us later on. So what's the frontal lobe in the brain? What is the frontal lobe responsible for? Just shout them out. Yeah, this is a family in here. Cool. So like, you don't need to raise your hand. Just like shout, and we'll hear you. Decision making, good. So executive function, yeah. You go home and you're really, really stressed out. And you're like, I've got 3 things to do today, and I don't know what order to do them in, and I don't know how much time I should give them all. Like, that's a bad frontal lobe, right? Like grad students, everybody's fried, and they get home and they're like, right? Okay, frontal lobe. So also motor function, right? Has anybody had neuro yet? They're doing pathways, pyramidal tracks or anything? Okay, no worries. We'll get there. So motor function. What about parietal lobe? Sensory strip, cool. Okay, yeah, that's the main one. Well, I'm cool with that. Temporal lobe, what's that? Huh? Say it loud. Auditory, good. What else?
Desire, want. What you want to do is more primitive.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I see you. What else? What about memory? That's kind of important for us too. Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to frontal lobe because I forgot one that I think is most important. What's the prefrontal cortex? That's kind of like, go back to an executive function. It kind of makes you, right? The difference between us and animals have 2 layers, so they can kind of like get around and think a little bit. We have like, I think it's, don't quote me on it, I think it's 8 or 9 layers that allows us to go back in memory, and it goes back to evaluating situations, and it gives us the ability to make and appreciate art or music, or, it makes humans humans. So that's huge, and that we'll come back to that one in a minute. Okay, occipital lobe, what's that? Okay, processing vision, good. So we're gonna learn, so what I kinda wanna do, I wanna kinda give you guys a little bit, and I'm gonna give you something that's a little bit more complicated, and I'm gonna show you guys like a lifesaver, and I'm gonna like go back, and I'm gonna kinda circle back around. So I'm gonna kinda, instead of making it super, super complicated, start basic, make it advanced, go back, make it basic again, and then move on, okay? So, basic concept is the cortex and everything in the cortex, this is the cortex, is the frequency of firing. So every nerve has a frequency of firing. It's like how much it fires, how healthy that nerve is. That's completely dependent on, and this is huge for us, this is completely dependent on firing from the thalamus up. The thalamus, the main firing into the thalamus is from the cerebellum, from joint mechanoreception and joint proprioception, joint and muscle proprioception. So as chiropractors, it's kind of a big deal because that's kind of what we do. So I'm going to show you guys a video, and I'm going to come back, and it's Dr. Carrick talking about what we're talking about right now, and I'm going to go back and make it a little bit more basic. Wait for it.
And we know
this is super old school, by the way,
our insights with
in case y'all couldn't tell.
Firing of anything that
this was actually like last Wednesday.
Here, the intermediate area, which is, say, man, this is too complex to understand human function. It's not too sensory here. Vasoplator at a certain frequency of firing. We do know, however, if I speak louder, you'll be able to hear me louder because the frequency of firing.
Right, so I'm afraid to jump too far ahead, so you guys just hang on with me for like 30 seconds and we'll get to the point.
As I increase the amplitude of the environmental potential. And as you increase the amplitude from this potential here to this amplitude, then the frequency of firing of the primary afferent increases accordingly. That is to say, the amplitude of the graded non-propagated receptor potential will dictate the frequency.
If you have no idea what he's talking about, that's totally understandable.
The frequency of firing of primary
we'll explain that in a second, don't
that induces plasticity at the second-order neuronal pool. The second-order neuronal pool of humankind is such that our colleagues last year in November at Laval University found that the frequency of firing of the entire cerebral cortex was as a consequence of the frequency of firing of second-order dorsal column projections to the thalamus. The second-order dorsal column projections to the thalamus are, in fact, the first synapse primary afferents from joint mechanoreceptors, largely joints in the zygapophyseal articulation of the spinal neuraxis. So that's real cool. The frequency of firing of the cerebral cortex.
It's part one. Did that make like 50% of sense before I explain it?
Kind of like that video with the German guy, differential girdle spring. You guys have seen that. Makes zero sense.
Let me just give you a cool mechanism here real quick. That's a brain. Believe it or not, it's a brain, I promise you. Frontal lobes this way. So I have, what are some parts of my frontal lobes? Motor strip, supplementary and premotor, and then dorsolateral prefrontal, and then down here I have a little bit of orbital frontal. So orbital frontal, right here, dorsolateral prefrontal, supplementary motor, premotor, and then motor. And then we have some frontal eye fields and some other stuff thrown in there, okay? Back here we have this little dividing strip. And then we have my parietal lobes. We have areas 3, 1, and 2, right there. And then area 5 and area 7. And then we have, temporal lobes, and then we have occipital lobes back here. So check this out. I've told you that if I have fuel and I have activation, neurons do what? Survive. And if these receptors that I'm talking about, if everything's cool, they go to life and not death. So what is the genesis of all brain activation then? Where does it all start? Check this out. All your primary afferents, I'm going to take 3, 1, and 2, and I'm going to divide it up right here. 3, 1, and 2. Okay? 1 and 2 come from fascia receptors, soft tissue receptors, a little bit of joint mechanoreceptors. But area 3 comes from muscle spindles. Okay? Muscle spindles. So, 1 and 2 will not summate unless 3 tells them to. Uh-oh. Guess who owns number 3? Chiropractors. Nobody else. Nobody else manipulates 3 like we do. Large diameter afferent stimulation. I'm not talking about getting your fascia and going, does that feel good? I'm talking about those adjustments, that exercise, those large diameter bombardments that come into the nervous system. They fire into 1 and 2. This thing collectively, guys, fires into areas 5 and 7 so we know where the hell we're at. Fires into the supplementary and premotor areas so they'll activate. And then these guys collectively fire into the dorsolateral prefrontal area, so I'm human. If you take away this, you take away frontal development. It's gone. It doesn't exist. Guess what else fires up these two guys? The contralateral cerebellum fires into this guy and to this guy so that you can make motor programs and so that you can make limbic and executive functional programs.
Okay, before he gets too over the top, we're going to stop. Some of y'all got that. If you're in try 1, 2, and 3, you're going to have no idea what he just said, and that's cool, because we're going to go over it. Go back to my PowerPoint. Hang on.
Can we have access to that?
I can find a way to do that, yeah. Give me like a week or 2, but yeah. It's cool, right?
Yeah.
Pumps me up, man, because when I got here, I was like, what do we do? Okay, really quick story. I grew up, when I was 5, my mom had a hip replacement. She had a really bad hip. She ended up getting nerve pain from it, a chronic nerve pain. If anybody touched her, sent her to the ER. They'd have to knock her out. She was always drugged up. Me and my brother did every house chore. my dad had to work because my mom couldn't work, and me and my brother, it was our job to like take care of her, right? So she went to 23 different doctors, and that was 3 chiropractors, 7 orthopedic surgeons, a couple neurologists, a couple pain management people, a couple people that were really specific in fibromyalgia. Nobody did anything, right? They were all terrible. The 2 people that helped them, or actually the 3 people that helped the most were the chiropractors, but it didn't do enough. It did like 50, 60% better than everybody else was doing, but it didn't get her 100%, right? So then I started, if you guys don't know me, I started at Life and got involved with the guy that you guys saw in that first video when he was treating that kid and the mom. And my mom spent a week with him, and it was the most improvement I'd ever seen, and I had no idea what it was, right? I had just shown up. But I was like, okay, I've been around. And you guys got to think, like when patients go and see 22 doctors, it's not like that's not one trip. That's like if you can't even touch her hip, imagine getting her in a car and driving an hour down the interstate to see this doctor and coming back. That's visit 1. That's to like introduce yourself to the doctor and say, oh, we need you to come back 3 times just to tell you like we have no idea what's wrong with you. Right? So when I say that many doctors, this was like over 15 years of like fail. So then when we started this was cool because I was like, okay, like now we're on to something. So what is this? So I enrolled in Life, and I was there for 4 quarters, and they never explained what in the world chiropractic did. They talked about the history, they talked about the philosophy, they talked about all these things. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but like I want to help my mom. I want to help people like my mom. So what do we do? And it's the same thing kind of at Parker where they kind of dabble at it, but I want to hit it because we're here. We're in school and they're not telling us what like we're doing. They talk about muscle spindles and they don't relate it to chiropractic. They talk about other things and I'm like, oh, that would have been good if they inserted, like chiropractic school stuff in chiropractic school. But we're going to take care of that. We're going to take care of that. We're going to talk about contraindications today. We're going to talk about what we do in a, what in the world is subluxation, what in the world an adjustment does. We're going to talk about what we do, and hopefully that makes sense to me. If we're better knowing what we do, we'd be better at helping a patient. I hear a bunch of conversations like, are you straight? Do you do extremities? Do you do non-hands-on modalities? Guys, like I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't speak for this club, but I care about the patient. After what I've been through growing up, I care about the patient, and the patient is above all else. I don't care what you call our profession, I'm gonna do. But when it comes down, when that first person comes in student clinic, or when you walk across that stage, it's like, do you trust yourself as a doctor if your mom was sick and that your first patient was your mom? Are you good enough? I don't want to refer my mom to somebody else. I want to treat my mom, right? I don't want to have to make some other doctor treat her that knows more than me. I want to get that. So it's a little motivation for you guys. Like, don't go into this school. Graduate school, here's the thing. Graduate school is the bridge between undergrad, where you're given all the information, and grad school, where you're like, okay, now I've got to supply my own information. And like you guys have learned that. The more you're in school, you're like, dude, I got to teach myself. Like, I don't even know what's going on in this class. Half of y'all are on Facebook. Like, do your patients a service. Better yet, don't do them a disservice, right? Treat them the best you can. With that said, let's roll. Okay. Does anybody know who that is? I'll give you a t-shirt if you know who that is.
Is that Maria Montessori?
Huh?
The Montessori?
What size shirt do you wear?
I don't know, medium, large.
You want a long sleeve or short sleeve?
Whatever the cheaper one is, I guess.
You want light blue or navy blue?
I'll save the money. Navy.
Okay. I'll deal with this in a minute before
Okay, yeah.
waiting, but you got a shirt. That is Dr. Maria Montessori. Has anybody been to Montessori school when they were little?
Oh, okay.
What did they emphasize when you were little?
Making toast.
Yeah. They want to get you active learning as soon as possible. And those kids normally come out super, super smart. Because in their developmental phase, when their nervous system and their neuromuscular systems are still developing, those kids are doing, learning, exploring, right? And that's huge, because that's going to play into neuron theory in a minute. So she came out, and before she even knew any, this was like way a long time ago. But now, where's my athletic trainers, my personal trainers at? Okay, cool. So I won't put it in the form of a question, but there's a huge, huge link between exercise and cognition. The more you move, the better your cognitive abilities are going to be. You see people studying out here walking. They're like walking around like all the buildings like with their notes, and I'm like, brilliant, they got it. They're going to do really good on their test. So not only do you see people, the more you move and the more you active learn, the smarter, the better able you are to learn, but the more you exercise, you see those people, they have better brains. They just do. And she kind of figured that out somehow way back in the day, and that's how she started. That's why there's Montessori schools everywhere, which is pretty cool. Dr. Brock, that second video, he hinted on this a little bit, and we're going to break it down. So like I said, that was super, super complicated. Now we're going to break it down and make it super easy, okay? So for every nerve, especially in the cortex, that's what we're going to be talking about right now, but for every nerve in the body, it needs three things. I gave you guys right there. So what are they? Okay, that's huge. Because neurons need perpetual stimulation to not die. Well, that's a huge problem, right? Because what about the nerves in our eyes when we go to sleep at night for 12 hours? Some of y'all get wasted and sleep for like 24 hours straight. I know you. So why do those nerves not die? Or if you're in a really, really quiet room and you don't hear anything for a couple hours, why do those nerves not die? Have we thought about that? That's kind of cool. So we're going to get into that. And then we see all the glucose stuff. We're going to talk about oxygen. My main one that I want to hit today, and some of y'all that have been in here for a while, if I'm like skipping over something, you guys think it's important, just speak. Speak. Whatever. Okay, cool. So here's what we're going to do. The brain is like, oh shit, we got a problem. Yeah, I'm about to go to sleep for like a long time, and these neurons aren't going to get stimulated. And the brain goes, I got you. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to use something that I'm always getting info from, and we're going to use that and bring it up to the cortex, that we're going to feed all the neurons of the eyes and the ears and all these other things so they don't die. Does anybody know what that is? Proprioception. All the receptors that receive gravity influence. Because, I hate to break it to y'all, like we're always under gravity, right? So your brain goes, problem solved, we're good. We can use joint mechanoreception, we can use muscle spindles, we can do all these things because that's always firing to the brain. So even when we're not using the neurons, for other things, we're still good. Those are going to fire into those neuron pools, and we're going to keep them alive, right? So who's Harvey Lillard? Very first patient. He was not a wellness patient. He was not like, I'm just coming in for help. He was like, dude, I can't hear you. I don't know, you were like this magnet guy, DD, I don't know, you did some stuff, but now you're a chiropractor, whatever you're saying, I can't hear you. He was deaf, right? As the story goes. So DD goes, I've been working on this thing, let's try it. So he adjusts them, and in some of the green books, he says it's T1, and then BJ came out and he goes, nah, it was C1, he just didn't want people to try C1 and not know what they're doing and kill somebody. So, and that's in the green books, you guys can look and teach me some of that stuff too. I'm still learning on it too. But as the story goes, he adjusts C1 and the dude's hearing comes back. And that's super important because maybe the neurons to his ear and his hearing weren't dead. They weren't just firing enough. The pooled neurons those hearing nerves went to in the brain just weren't firing enough. So all of a sudden, when he had this subluxation, he was fixated. There was no movement, right? So there's no input coming from movement to match that pool of neurons. So as soon as he adjusted, boom, we got neurons, we've got activation, we've got movement, and now that same pool of neurons that wasn't firing enough, we call that frequency of firing, or central integrated state, the health of a neuron, is now firing. Pretty damn cool. So when you see problems like, okay, and we've all heard like chiropractic miracles through everything. It doesn't have to be hearing, it could be vision, it could be they can't move their arm, they get adjusted, and it's like, boom, what's up? You know what I mean? Why is that? Because we're trying to make things move that aren't moving. We're trying to give the brain ability to sense something or to get more input from something that's not supplying enough input. Does that make sense? That's kind of huge. So if I don't make sense, like, let me know. Okay? Okay. So gravity is really, really huge. So let's talk about the adjustment. Can I have 3 volunteers? Go for it. And then just come on up. So with that said, the more gravity influences, the more activation we have of the nervous system, right? Can I have you lay down face up right here? Come on, can you sit right here? And then you're going to be my standing man, so you're good right here. Okay. Imagine if I take the same exact adjustment on all three of those people. Let's say it's a cervical adjustment. Same exact line of drive. Can't do it. I'm here. Whatever. Same exact line of drive. Same exact force. Same exact, both the contact point for the doctor and the patient out of these three people. So we do a seated cervical, we do a supine cervical, and a standing cervical. Who's going to receive the most stimulation? Standing. Cool. Next. And then? Why? Because he's got to fight gravity the least, right? Okay, cool. So for our patients, and this is cool because we've got, what, 300 plus chiropractic techniques. And everybody's saying, nah, this one works. Or this one works. Or this one works better. Or this one works not as much. You guys got to understand something. There's no better technique, but there's a better technique for the specific patient at that specific time. Right? If she's good and she's had food all day, like my girlfriend is really, really bad about working 14 hours straight and not eating lunch, and then she wants me to adjust her when I get home, and I'm like, well, when's the last time you ate? She was like, last night for dinner. I'm like, I'm not touching you, go eat something. Or grad school students that don't sleep for a really, really long time. How do you think their blood sugar is? So back to those three things in neuron theory. Glucose, oxygen, stimulation. How's the blood sugar? Crap. How's the oxygen maybe? Not so good. So I'm not going to apply all this super, super high stimulation to somebody that's metabolically fragile. Does that make sense? That's why activator could be super, super, super good for some people. That's why Gonstead, if he did a seated cervical, why he was really, 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 really good with some people, because that's what they needed. They needed a stronger adjustment than something that was laying down, right? Somebody that maybe went to him that was laying down, they got adjusted, they were like, yeah, I was okay, you know, I feel a little bit better, not so much, and then like Gonstead showed up and he goes, well, I'm trying this new thing, sit down, let me try it. And they're like, whoa. Sometimes Gonstead's too much. I had a friend that got adjusted Gonstead and she threw up 12 times. Because it fried her brainstem. We're going to talk about the pathways where those muscle spindles and those joint mechanoreceptors go up into the cerebellum, go into the brainstem before going into the opposite side cortex, and just fried her. Those neurons couldn't handle that strong of an adjustment. And the guy who adjusted her was like, that's just urinate. And I was like, whoa. You know? Like, it doesn't have to be urinate, right? Maybe urinate should have been handling some activator or something like that at the time. That's why it's cool to have more tools in the toolbox depending on what patient you have. Okay? I think I'm good. Thank you, guys. So we talked about seated standing. So now let's talk about where there's more receptors in the body. There might be that guy. What's that called? Homunculus. Why is that important? That's your brain's idea of where you are in space, right? So if you notice, this is based on your, like obviously you want to have a very good idea of where your hands are in space to use your hands more, right? Your tongue, you've got a lot of sensory innervation, you've got feet. What I think is really interesting in this is what's one anatomical landmark that chiropractors deal with a lot, like blank pain. Low back pain. How big is that low back? Give me 3 more people really quick that don't mind me showing everybody their lower back. Everybody's like, BAM!
It's hairy, but
That's cool. Will you sit facing, all y'all sit facing that way.
I'm joking.
That's perfect. Yeah. Yeah. No, okay. That's actually perfect.
All right.
Okay, without looking, how many fingers is touching you?
2.
How many fingers?
2.
How many fingers?
3.
How many fingers?
1.
How many fingers?
1.
How many fingers?
2.
How many fingers?
3.
Okay, he's good. You can sit down. All right, your turn.
Right here or back there?
Either way, whatever you want. I'm just going to sit down right next to you. How many fingers?
1,
How many fingers?
2,
How many fingers?
1,
How many fingers?
3 to 4,
How many fingers?
1,
How many fingers?
1,
How many fingers?
3.
So she's not too bad. Good job. All right, let's do it, Matt. All right, Matt's going to be an athlete. He's going to be a boss at this. Let's see. How many fingers? How many?
1.
Okay, how many? So you would think you would get that every single time, right? How many times did they mess up?
Couple.
More than you thought?
Yeah.
Okay. If you did it on your hands, you can use 2 toothpicks. And people will be like 2, 3, 4, 1. Easy. Easy, 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 easy. You start going other places that don't have as much mapping in your brain, they're terrible at it. You can try it. I try stuff with my girlfriend all the time. Like, yo, I learned something cool. Come here, let me try this. And she's like, whatever. Okay, cool. I'm going to do my little... Oh, here we go. So going back to this. So obviously the places with the most sensory mapping in your brain, it's going to be a more powerful adjustment. That makes sense, right? Common sense. So we talked about the supine seated standing. We talked about, we will talk about that. Proximal versus distal. Is it stronger to adjust more midline or more peripheral? Midline is way stronger. Okay? Is it stronger, is it more of a, I'm just call it just a stronger adjustment. Is it stronger to adjust flexors or extensors? Flexors have more mapping because we do everything in front of us, right? So at least upper body, and then behind us it's the flexors in the back. But we do everything here, so we want to know what's going on here, right? Make sense? Okay, so if you adjust the shoulder, we'll teach you guys that in a second. It's stronger than if you do a posterior muscle on the top, okay? Why do I have a picture of boxing up there? Because, oh, that's why, see? Did that on purpose. You actually have more, in terms of mechanoreceptors and muscle spindle activation, you've got more in the first 2 inches of your upper cervical spine than anywhere else in your body. So upper cervical people, it's huge, right? That's why your stuff works. If they're metabolically able to handle it, right? Sometimes you do it, you blow them out. Some people in here that have concussions, TBIs, that have got other stuff, you go straight to upper cervical, and then they crash, and they get up and they're like, woo, and they're like high or drunk. Who's felt that? After an adjustment, you get up and you're like, whoa, it's too much, right? You should do it and be like, yeah, much better. So if you get up and you're kind of like woozy from it, you don't feel like you can stand up straight, or it kind of fries you out, maybe take it down. Maybe don't do upper cervical. Maybe do a thoracic. Maybe do a rib. Maybe do a hand on that same side. See how they handle it and work your way back up. Why do I have Muhammad Ali? Okay, so think about boxing. So we know if you stand up, it's more input. If you go upper cervical, it's more input. What do you think happens when a boxer, so Matt, where do you, if you want to knock somebody out, out? Or who else fights in here? Cool, I love it. So if you want to knock somebody out, where do you hit them?
Hit them with the jaw, rapidly move their head.
So what would you call that? It's like a TMJ adjustment. So if you do a standing TMJ or a standing upper cervical, that's like, that guy. Maybe, if they can't handle it, right? Some people can, some people can't. So you got to kind of like measure that out and look at the patient. And this whole try, we're going to kind of break this down, and we're going to say, okay, this is maybe how you can see if that patient's metabolically stable or not. And then do it. Or don't do it, because I don't want to get in trouble with whole adjusting. Okay. SOT. So why is SOT cool? Who's SOT in here? Yikes. Okay, cool. Let me teach you something. SOT is cool because if you go and you do a test on a joint and you want to figure out how mobile it is, what if they're hypermobile? Do you want to make a joint that's already too mobile more mobile? You want to block it. You want to make sure that it's getting some input to basically stabilize that joint through the muscles around it. You don't want to make it more, right? So SOT is pretty cool. So I'm not saying like this technique's better, this technique's better, this technique's better. I'm saying learn your technique. Learn what makes your technique work, and learn what makes your technique not good for a patient, so you don't jack somebody up. And then maybe learn a couple of them. So if you have a patient that comes in that doesn't fit, and then like that's the thing, is if you know the weakness of your technique, learn the opposite technique, so when those patients come in, you can fix them. Just a thought. We already talked about that, dude. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the cool part. What's up?
What's the best way to learn what the weaknesses are for techniques and stuff? Like, what do you recommend? Like,
normally, it's whoever's the either, because for every club there's an academic advisor.
Repeat the question.
Oh, so he's asking, how do you know what's the like the positives and the negatives of your technique? So most techniques normally have their own textbook. I know SOT does, Gonstead does. At Life they use full spine. They've got a full spine. So whatever, like. Oh, and then in the library, they got a bunch of DVDs for like Activator and stuff. We just kind of burn them illegally and watch them. Whatever. Like I said, it's about the patient, right? So what up, Nick?
I was gonna say, it's really good thing to look at techniques to see, especially like cervical stuff, see if it's a technique that incorporates coupled motion versus uncoupled motion.
Here. Hey, that's good stuff. Will you explain what that is?
Yeah, so you want to look at techniques that generally, focus in on coupled motion adjustments, and that means, are you putting the joint into the normal kind of motion that that joint should be into and adjust it? Because you'll see a lot of adjustments actually go against coupled motion, and that's like introducing pathological motion to the joint. You may need to do that at times, but you need to keep in mind, are you adjusting, how many times are you adjusting that person in an uncoupled manner? And so I think that's just a good thing to look at as well.
For my personal trainers, my strength and conditioning people, we it's like the running joke in a gym when we see like other trainers or people doing like stuff that like makes no functional sense. Or in rehab, if you're rehabbing a shoulder and you don't rehab the entire body to support and stabilize that joint that's messed up first, you just don't do it. It doesn't make sense. So same thing with adjusting. If you're gonna apply input into the nervous system for what we do, make it a correct movement. Because if they're not moving and you want them to get them to move that way, why don't you set them up in a movement that they're going to move in once you fix it? So that's another thought too. So let's talk about muscle spindles real quick. What's the job, simplest explanation of a muscle spindle? What does it do to a muscle? Does it activate it and make the muscle contract, or does it relax the muscle? Oh man, bring you guys back, huh? So yeah, so it's checking out, it says, oh, I'm stretching, I'm going to contract, right? So, do I have any volunteers to let me just set up on them in side posture and hold them in that side posture for the rest of the club? Yeah, right. So if you stretch them, that muscle spindle is going to contract. And we're going to talk about why that hurts in a second. We'll get there. I got ahead of myself, my bad. So muscle spindle is going to make it contract. So the muscle spindle, let's just say, I'm going to do this back on my shirt so I can keep talking. Alright, cool. Alright, can everybody still hear me kind of good? Can everybody see? I know this is like where our whiteboard is in this room. I can kind of redo that over there maybe if we have time. But your muscle spindles are located in here, right? You've got intrafusal and extrafusal muscle fibers. Which ones are the muscle fibers, which ones are the spindles in? Intrafusal. So if I set somebody up if I do a setup, and then I do a fast stretch, or if I go in and actually do an adjustment, what are those muscle spindles going to do? Keep in mind that I'm stretching that joint, and then I'm stretching it even more in a fast stretch. It's going to tighten that muscle, right? So let's say all these muscles tighten. Well, that's a problem, because that's the side that already hurts. That's the side that's already hypertonic. That's the feeling that you get and go, dude, I need to get adjusted. Right? They're already tight. Why would I want to make something more tight? Okay, there's this thing called a Golgi tendon. What does the Golgi tendon do? It relaxes it. Cool. So when you bring that thing to threshold at the end range of motion and you fire through that end range of motion, you tell these Golgi tendons, those Golgi tendons are going, whoa, I'm already really, really stretched and the muscle's already really, really tight. If we don't relax, I'm going to rip off this bone, and that's a huge problem. Right? So the Golgi tendon, let's say this is the spinal cord. We'll send a 1B afferent. If you're new to the whole lingo, don't worry about it. It's called a 1B fiber, but all we'll say for right now is it sends a nerve. So the Golgi tendons are right here, right? Because they would be close to the muscle and the bone to figure out the relationship between the muscle and the bone. So if it's too tight, it's going to send send a nerve into the spinal cord and say, yo, we need to chill out. This is intense. And then the spinal cord goes, cool. So it sends one back out to inhibit these muscles. So it kind of works like what are those things called, like a surge protector? If those amps get too high, that surge protector clicks on and goes, shut it down. And it goes, and then it does, and then it basically drops the complete frequency of firing of that muscle back to reset. So now it's at neutral. Does that make sense? So when you're adjusting them, because here's the deal. I don't care if that bone is left or right. That's not what we say moving a bone and whatever, but you're worried about that muscle. right? Because keep in mind, those muscles are what's sending info to the brain to power the brain. So if I've got one side that's rock hard and the other side that's normal, this input is going to be completely different from this input into the brain, and that's what creates problems. That creates mismatching, the maps get weird, the activation, those start firing weird, and we'll get there later on down the track. But does that make sense so far? Muscle spindle, Golgi tendon, shutting the muscle down, fast stretch. So it does that. The faster you go, the more all of these will fire at the same time, and you get a better response. The slower you go, the reason why in sports they say don't do a static stretch anymore is because if you do a slow stretch, they're uncoordinated firing of those muscle spindles. They'll fire like one at a time as they need to, and you've actually increased the gain or the tone of that muscle. So that's why in class, if you're setting up on your friend and you're just sitting there talking in side posture for like 15 minutes, they will shoot you or they'll get up and punch you in the face because like this hurts. They're going to walk around the rest of the day like this because that side's completely locked up because you slow stretched it compared to the other side. Does that make sense? Has everybody been there? I'm not just making this stuff up, I promise. I wanted to hit this guy so bad. It was the teacher, so I didn't do it. This was in life, it wasn't here, so I don't think it was whatever. But it happens. So if you slow stretch a muscle, you're going to increase gain. If you fast stretch it, it's going to hit the Golgi tendon and it's going to release it, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, Gordon. Did I cover all of that? Yep, already showed that. Cool. So here's the deal. Think about what we just said and apply it to every muscle that touches the spine. Yikes. Here's the other point I want to make. Our skeletal muscle, are they reflexive or are they volitional? Volitional meaning you can move them on purpose. Here's what they teach you in school. They're volitional. Like if I move my bicep, boom. Okay, here's the trick. Everybody take their C6 and move it to the right on their own without moving any other joint. Don't worry, I'll wait. It's not going to happen, guys. It's reflexive. They're both. So part of it is volitional. If I go flexion, if I go extension, all of those things are volitional. But here's the deal. We're working on other things. If you have pain in a joint, you will reflexively tighten this joint and tighten this joint to make sure that the movement in this joint doesn't happen because it hurts. Okay? If you've got a kinetic chain problem, so your ankle is designed to be, okay, so it works in like an opposite pattern. So your ankle is a super mobile joint. You can kind of roll it all around. Your knee, not so much. That's a stable joint. You're only working in that one plane, right? Your hip is mobile. Your SI joint's stable. So it goes mobile, stable, all the way up. Okay? So if you have a kinetic chain problem, you're going to have those muscles might change reflexively. So we've talked about pain, we've talked about the kinetic chain. We've also got vestibular problems. So, and then this is what we do a lot with that spinning thing you guys saw in that video. If they have a vestibular problem. If you guys have ever, I don't know if nobody in here has, but you guys have heard of splitting cable. Like if you've got one house and they're getting cable and you go get like a splitter and whatever cable they get, you get to your house for free. Okay, the vestibular system, and that's the thing that monitors what way you're moving in space, right? So it's helping your brain figure out which way your brain or your head's moving to control where your head's at. Your brain likes to know where it is at all times. Imagine a splitter that goes from the vestibular system to your eyes and to the spine. So if you're doing stuff with a patient and you see their eyes go tick, 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 or they don't do something right, that same exact bad cable, that same exact bad message is going to their spine, and all those paraspinal muscles are going to lock up when they don't need to. It's just getting a bad signal, right? So you can adjust them all day long, and you're actually a really good adjustment, really good setup, but that vestibular system, that vestibular input still sucks. So it comes back. So if you do, and that's why chiropractors win Epley maneuvers, or they do some other stuff like vestibular stuff, because you got to look into what you're adjusting. You don't want to treat, that's why we got into this, most of us, is they don't want to treat a patient symptom-based. And so we want to teach you guys to not treat a subluxation as a symptom. You know, if you just go in and keep adjusting the same spot, or you see those people with those like chiropractic cards, like, oh, I'm C2 on the left, that's just the way I am. No, you're not. You know, something's making that muscle do that. Something's turning that bone that way. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions so far? Are we kind of good? Okay, cool. Same thing with your eyes. If your eyes suck, we're looking at, and we can do stuff, we'll do stuff later on. We've got a whole day on eyes. And if you guys saw that video, they're like, why is he looking at eyes? Eyes do the same thing. If your eyes suck, you're going to have really, really weird either hyper or hypotonic muscles around your paraspinals. It's going to give you a subluxation to where you can adjust all day long, but if that input's bad, it's going to come right back. We're not actually going to get into this. I'm just making a point that there's parts in your brain that will control tone of different parts of your body. So if you've got a shoulder flexor, and that's super hypertonic, and it's bringing the shoulder blade over and that whole shoulder girdle over, the muscles that connect your shoulder girdle to the spine are going to be off. So we're going to talk about how to adjust thoracics and stuff like that, because all of these things, and again, we'll get into it, but we actually have a whole day on that, we actually have 2 days on that, because that's adjusting for autonomics. So if you see patients with really bad autonomics, we'll talk about that. Midbrain, so we'll get through that. Bryce. So Bryce is our research guy. So he's got his whole background in research, and he's really, really wicked smart, way smarter than me. And he's going to get up whenever we figure this out, and he's going to basically, on our website, we've got all our research papers on there already. So if you guys are more interested in anything, go on there, look at a research paper, and print it out. I think, is there an option to print out, or Maca?
No, there's not.
Okay, just look at it.
If you want a copy, we can get you a copy.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's teach some people how to adjust. Everybody find what's in finding